On this day, the old carpenter passed by the busy street as usual. We happened to catch a puppet circus performing. An idea suddenly occurred to the old carpenter: why don't I use my skills to make the most exquisite puppet in the world to keep me company? The old carpenter did what he said. He ran to the wood merchant and asked for a piece of wood. As luck would have it, the wood merchant was frightened by a piece of shaking wood and saw the old carpenter coming. Asking for wood is like throwing away a hot potato. He quickly gave him this strange piece of wood. The old carpenter worked day and night, pouring all his effort into every move. Finally, the shape of the puppet gradually took shape. The amazing thing is that as soon as the puppet was made, it actually started talking. The old carpenter was so excited that his hands were shaking. He treated the puppet as his own sweetheart. He made him a beautiful and fitting set of clothes and gave him a nice name, Pinocchio. The old carpenter decided to send Pinocchio to school, but who would have thought that Pinocchio was too playful? While the old carpenter was not paying attention, he sneaked out of the school and trotted all the way to the puppet circus. A glance at the circus owner. Then he saw Pinocchio. The boss was wondering, how can this puppet move without strings? When school was over, the old carpenter went to the school to pick up Pinocchio and waited for a long time. There was no sign of the child. He ran to ask the principal. The principal said seriously, Pinocchio didn't come to school at all. The old carpenter was panicked and went to ask his neighbors. I saw Pinocchio go to the puppet circus. When the old carpenter heard this, his head buzzed. He felt like he had lost his soul. Without saying a word, he embarked on a journey to find Pinocchio. Here, the circus owner was worried about the undercooked lamb, and he was so angry that he wanted to use the clown puppet as firewood. At this time, Pinocchio stood up. Although he was naughty, he was kind-hearted. He mustered up the courage to speak for the clown. He even said he was willing to sacrifice himself to save the Joker. The circus owner was moved by Pinocchio's kindness. Not only did he not make things difficult for him, he also generously gave him 5 gold coins. Pinocchio happily set out on his way home with the gold coins, but he met 2 malicious guys on the way. As soon as these 2 guys saw the gold coins on Pinocchio, their eyes lit up and they started to have e. They approached Pinocchio with big smiles on their faces and told him that if he planted the gold coins in the ground, a money tree would grow. How could Pinocchio, who was young and had little social experience, see through the conspiracy of these 2 guys? Pinocchio followed the instructions of the 2 villains and planned to plant gold coins at the end of the woods. At this time, a clever cricket appeared, and the cricket gave Pinocchio an earnest advice: don't be fooled. There is no such thing as a cash cow, they are trying to trick you. But Pinocchio's mind was full of money, and he didn't listen to the cricket at all, and just kept walking forward. But before they reached the designated location, 2 bad guys rushed out with their faces covered. Pinocchio is now. Realizing he had been tricked, he turned and ran away in terror, and finally ran to a spooky old castle. A mysterious blue fairy lived in the castle. The blue fairy saw Pinocchio and said, "This is where the dead go. You can't come in." But just as Pinocchio was about to turn around and leave, the 2 villains caught up with him. They grabbed Pinocchio and hung him from a tree. Early the next morning, a kind mouse passed by and rescued Pinocchio. He took him to the castle. Pinocchio, who had been hanging all night. His body was as weak as a leaf. The blue fairy took out the potion and fed it to him with concern. Pinocchio then slowly recovered. After that, Pinocchio chatted with the blue fairy. He recalled his own experience, how he had lied all the time to cover up his mistakes, and as a result, his nose seemed to be under a spell. Pinocchio was so frightened by his long nose that he didn't know what to do. The blue fairy smiled, and the bird pecked her nose lightly, and it pecked it off. After this lesson, Pinocchio dared not lie again. But the blue fairy knew that Pinocchio still had a long way to go and a lot to learn. So he was asked to go find his father. Pinocchio bids farewell to the blue fairy and continues his journey, only to run into the 2 bad guys again. The 2 guys are still trying to trick Pinocchio, saying they will help him plant the gold. Pinocchio hesitated this time. But I couldn't resist their sweet talk. They asked Pinocchio to fetch water. As soon as Pinocchio turned around, the 2 bad guys disappeared with the gold coins. Pinocchio found out that he had been cheated again, and ran to the court to appeal angrily. After hearing his story, the gorilla judge in the court made a ridiculous judgment. It turns out that this country has a strange law that says only innocent people go to jail. In order to leave the court, Pinocchio had to lie that he had stolen a lot of things. In this way, he once again embarked on a journey to find his hometown. When he returned to his hometown, his neighbors said that his father had gone out to look for him. Pinocchio heard this. Feeling anxious and guilty, he rushed all the way. Finally, I was so tired that I fell asleep on the beach. Just then, the blue fairy appeared before him again. By this time, the blue fairy had grown into a beautiful adult. Pinocchio asked the blue fairy in surprise, "Why won't I grow up?" The blue fairy gently told him, "Because you're not a real kid." Pinocchio's eyes were full of longing after hearing this. "I want to become a real child." The blue fairy smiled and said, "As long as you perform well, you will have a chance." The next day, Pinocchio followed the blue fairy's instructions and went to school. At school, he met a mischievous boy. When these two met, they were like two magnets. They stuck together and played together all day long, and before they knew it, they were done. When Pinocchio returned home after dark, the snail nanny stopped him and said, "You didn't study well today, so you can't enter the house." Pinocchio lowered his head, feeling very regretful. The next day, the snail nanny handed the book to Pinocchio. "Let him go to school, then the blue fairy will forgive you." After hearing this, Pinocchio secretly made up his mind to perform well. From then on, his performance got better and better every day. The blue fairy happily said to Pinocchio, "Tomorrow you will become a real child. You can go and invite your friends to come over." Pinocchio jumped 3 feet high with excitement. He immediately went to find the little boy, but the little boy said nonchalantly, "I want to go there. This is the place where flowers speak the language of study. Please wait for the bus with me." At night, the car drove slowly towards him. Pinocchio saw that the car was full of children and he was very curious. "I couldn't help but get on the car too." But he never expected that the owner of this car turned out to be a human being. The boy just told a lie, but unexpectedly his nose grew 80 centimeters longer. In order to restore its original size, the Smurf had to let the sparrow eat it like crazy. It turns out that the boy is not a human at all, but a puppet. The traffickers tricked the children into eating strange food, and after the children ate it, they turned into donkeys one after another. Pinocchio also could not escape his fate. He was spotted by a circus owner and taken to the circus. During a circus performance, Pinocchio was accidentally seriously injured. The blue fairy saw the injured Pinocchio in the audience. He shed tears of grief because Pinocchio was seriously injured and could no longer perform, so the circus owner threw him into the sea like garbage. Just when Pinocchio thought he was going to die at sea, something magical happened. It turns out that when the donkey was drowned, Pinocchio was freed from the enchantment. It returned to its puppet form. It drifted in the sea like a piece of duckweed, and was finally swallowed by a great white shark. In the stomach of the great white shark, Pinocchio met a poor tuna. The tuna was terrified and could only shiver in the shark's stomach while waiting to be digested. Pinocchio fumbled around inside and suddenly found a light. He followed the light to a deeper place and found his father, whom he had been thinking about day and night. The father and son hugged each other excitedly. After reminiscing about the past, Pinocchio decided to escape with his father, but his father could not swim. So Pinocchio used all his strength to carry his father on his back while struggling to move forward in the shark's belly. At this time, the tuna plucked up the courage to venture out. He said to Pinocchio gratefully, "You gave me the courage to escape, and now I will help you." The tuna finally returned to land with Pinocchio and his father. After getting ashore, Pinocchio kissed the tuna gratefully, and his eyes were filled with tears. The father and son came to an old house. At this time, the old father was very weak. In order to make his father recover as soon as possible, Pinocchio ran to the farm and begged the farmer for milk. The farmer saw Pinocchio's pitiful appearance and learned that he had no money. "If you can help me work, I'll give you milk." Pinocchio nodded quickly in agreement. In this way, he became a handyman for the farmer, under his careful care. Don't think that your father's health is getting better day by day. That day, Pinocchio met the two bad guys again on his way home from get off work. These two villains have committed many evil deeds. He has ended up with a physical disability. When they saw Pinocchio, they tried to trick him into paying them again, but this time Pinocchio firmly refused them. At night, the father picked up the wooden brush and helped Pinocchio repair the damaged skin of the puppet with great care. The father looked at Pinocchio, feeling both relieved and worried. He wondered how long Pinocchio could stay with him. The next day, Pinocchio went to work as usual. At this time, the blue fairy appeared again. She looked at Pinocchio and said, "You have behaved very well during this period. You deserve one." A happy future. Pinocchio fell asleep in the arms of the blue fairy, and when he woke up, he found that he had turned into a real child. Pinocchio was surprised and delighted. He couldn't wait to run home and share this great joy with his father. The father and son snuggled together tightly, with happy smiles on their faces. From a naughty, playful and ignorant boy from a puppet to a real child who has gone through hardships and learned to grow up and take responsibility. Pinocchio's magical journey is like a bright star, shining forever in people's hearts. He told us that as long as we have a kind heart, have the courage to correct our mistakes, and persevere, we will be able to realize our dreams. Harvest a happy life. Please like and subscribe this channel for more interesting stories.